It's Friday, March 7th, 2025, a Friday 5-pack of stories. Ask or Tell Me Anything wonders if I'm cheering for lawfare against the Tate brothers, and questions about the Israel-Epstein connection next on the AM Update. Well, helmet stickers abound. Good job, everyone. High fives. We made it through another week on the AM Update, and I have a 5-pack of news stories for you. Up first, we're going to go to this. Donald Trump announcing more easing when it comes to tariffs. He said Thursday he's delaying for roughly 1 month tariffs on Mexican imports that are covered under a North American trade agreement he signed during his first term. Trump posted on Truth Social that goods that fall under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, or the USMCA, kind of like the car dealer or the car maker, automaker story that we talked about yesterday. These other companies are going to be exempted from that 25% tariff he imposed this week on those imports from Mexico and Canada. The delay will last until April 2nd, at which point Trump has pledged to impose reciprocal tariffs on all nations that have duties on U.S. imports. At this point, my head is kind of spinning with this tariffs story. Part of me says, what are we doing here? Part of me thinks that maybe this is an indication that Mexico has expressed they're willing to play ball on some level. Of course, tariffs, if nothing else, are a massive bargaining and leverage point that the president can enjoy. Here is Justin Castro the other day, just yesterday. He is crying on national television, and you're blackpilling?
On a personal level, I've made sure that every single day in this office, I put Canadians first, that I have people's backs. And that's why I'm here to tell you all that we got you. Even in the very last days of this government, we will not let Canadians down today and long into the future.
And literally crying as he said, we're never going to let you down. We got you, except for a few, protests on the streets of Ottawa. Then we're just going to seize your bank accounts, Other than that, here is this story number 3. I'm going to talk about this in more depth on Monday's Air Analysis, but unless something big happens over the weekend. But Gavin Newsom, California governor, trying to rehab his image, probably ahead of a likely 2028 run for president, had, a decent idea, given that he's a communist, but it's a decent idea for a communist, to start a podcast. And his first guests are going to be major generals in the MAGA movement. His first guest was Charlie Kirk, and Charlie Kirk from TPUSA absolutely mogged the California governor on the issue of dudes competing against women in female athletics. Okay, and I'll play this bite on Monday because I don't want to step on it too much, but Gavin Newsom was like, oh, yeah, that's an easy thing to do. We just have to be nice about it. That was basically his answer. So he is capitulating a little bit, California's lefty governor. Well, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries was asked about Newsom's comments. What in the world is he talking about?
I want to ask about California Governor Gavin Newsom's comments saying that Democrats were in the wrong for allowing transgender athletes to compete in female and girls sports. What is your response to that after Democrats had opposed the women and girls in sports?
I haven't seen his comments. What Democrats opposed was unleashing sexual predators on girls throughout the United States.
Wow. I mean, if I were a troon and I'm listening to House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries discussing Gavin Newsom's capitulation on the trans, the dudes in women's sports issue, and I'm listening to Hakeem Jeffries say the stance of the Democrat Party is making sure that sexual predators are not unleashed upon this nation's women. I'm starting to think if I'm a troon, he's talking about me. Good grief. And you could tell he was very uncomfortable, completely caught flat-footed. Story number 4, Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey is asking the Department of Justice to investigate whether Biden's cognitive mental decline allowed unelected officials to make decisions without his knowledge or approval. If that's the case, Biden's executive orders, pardons, and other actions may be unconstitutional and void. Man, that attorney general in Missouri there, he is serious as the day is long. Love Andrew Bailey. And finally, this soundbite of the week. Of course, we talked about this a couple of times. DJ Daniels, the 13-year-old who survived cancer and who was honored and surprised with membership, an honorary membership in the Secret Service during President Trump's address to the joint session of Congress this week. Well, the White House highlighted an interview they did with him, just discussing what he's all about and what really motivates him, especially looking death in the eye multiple times.
But you want to know the craziest part? Because my mom bathes me and my brothers all together, and out of nowhere I locked up, and then my dad was calling my name, and I started going to the slow thing, and he said, "Stop playing with me," and I started to act. I ain't gonna lie, I started to act slow, and then as soon as he said that, we was speeding all the way, running lights, going to the hospital, and then next thing you know, I was seizing on the table. They said, "Nah, we gonna have to go in his brain tonight." Ever since then, I had 13 brain surgeries, and that's how many times my personality has changed. And that's something that you don't hear from a terminally ill child. They had 5 months to live. I'm gonna keep on going until my gas tanks run out. And that's when God calls you home. You never know when God's gonna call you home. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my dad. And I know he's pretty proud of me, and I'm pretty proud of him too. And I'd like to thank President Trump, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here today.
It's really amazing for a 13-year-old. Tragically, to have that perspective, but he has it nonetheless. That's DJ Daniels. Quote, "I'm going to keep going until my gas tank runs out, and that's when God calls you home. You never know when God's going to call you home." It's really, really inspiring stuff. All right, let's get to some Ask or Tell Me Anything. Sorry, I've heard that before, and hearing that from him, that's really moving. I'd heard it once earlier this week, but hearing it again, really, really inspiring. Before we get to Ask or Tell Me Anything, try to the best of my abilities to see AM Update as a service to you, not as a vehicle for vanity project or self-promotion. Nonetheless, in this space, you do have to promote yourself, and so I would ask humbly again, even if you've already done so, give me a 5-star review. If you like what I do on the AM Update, give me a 5-star review at the podcast platform of your choice. That would typically be Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Spotify or Apple Podcasts, give me a 5-star review, even if you've already done so before. And you can follow me on social media at Real AM Update on X and Instagram. I try to post some more funny or fun content on Instagram at Real AM Update over the weekends. Hopefully can do that this weekend as well. All right, without further ado, let's get to some Ask or Tell Me Anything. Some really great questions this week, I think. Let's go to KM and Jim. Both kind of have the same question. Do you have an opinion on Ian Carroll? He was just on Joe Rogan. He gets labeled as a Jew hater by his critics, but from what I can tell, he's just claiming to call our Israeli intelligence or call out Israeli intelligence for shady things in the same way we condemn our own U.S. intelligence. So what's the issue? Jim Stalker writes, Ian Carroll posits that if the Epstein files are completely released, it would implicate Israel in a massive blackmail operation against prominent global power brokers. For that reason, we'll never get them in their entirety. Thoughts on that? So I'll take kind of both of these as one question. Do I have an opinion on Ian Carroll? I don't really have an opinion on him necessarily. I'll just say this, a really good rule of thumb, generally speaking, is that if you've never heard of somebody before, like 6 months ago, be very, very leery of them if they shoot to fame and prominence all of a sudden. This is the same kind of problem I had with Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek I'd never heard of before, and then all of a sudden he is everywhere in right-wing media within a few short months. Generally that happens because it's supposed to happen, or that person is just really talented at communicating and figures out how to tickle people's ears. Either way, it's not a complete 100% window into a person's intentions, but you have to be leery that they are maybe working you over or using you to some end, using their audience to some end. This is the case with Ian Carroll. I'd never heard of him until about 6 months ago, and I'd start to see some of his TikToks that he'd repost on X, going into various quasi-conspiratorial issues. He's a pretty articulate guy. He knows how to tell a story, weave a story together, edit very well. But I'd never heard of him, didn't really care. And I need to be careful as I get older as well, not to just write anybody off because I've never heard of them before, okay? I know I'm the curmudgeon, but I feel like I have a pretty good radar online of knowing who the players are, at least in the right-wing space. Kind of knowing who they are, where they come from, and I had never heard of this guy until about 6 months ago, and now he's like everywhere. He is everywhere. Everywhere to the point that Joe Rogan had him on his podcast this week. He had him on his podcast this week, and I haven't listened to this episode. I probably will not, and I don't listen to Joe Rogan Experience in its entirety very often at all. But my understanding is they got into Jeffrey Epstein. Will we ever get the list? That was just intimated here in the two questions. And I'll get to answering your questions specifically about what I think the geopolitical implications of the Epstein-Israel connection, if there is one, would be, just for a fun thought experiment. But I'll say this with Ian Carroll, to the comment about him being labeled as a Jew hater. Number one, in sympathies to him, I have no idea what anti-Semitism is anymore. And we'll get to this, I think, a little bit more in a bit. I have no idea what anti-Semitism is, okay? Am I not allowed to criticize Israel at all? Like, at all? Because there are some people, and I'm not really exaggerating that much, there are some people, it seems like, Christians, pre-millennial dispensationalists, Christians who really bristle when you even come up to the line of making any critique of the modern state of Israel whatsoever. Is that anti-Semitism? I don't think that it is. Is anti-Semitism pointing out that, maybe a person in a position of power is a, serious Orthodox Jew or has articulated positions that they really hate Christians? No, I don't think that's anti-Semitism. I mean, if, let's just say, the inventor of some really devastating vice was a Hindu, and that Hindu articulated his or her motivation for coming up and inventing this sinful vice because he wants to ensnare Christians, I mean, that wouldn't be, you would want to know who you're up against. But this is the problem. I see a lot of these commentators, and I'll get to Ian in a little bit, a lot of these commentators like Candace Owens. I've watched some of her stuff. I went back last year for a project I'm doing for my day job, and one of her videos popped up when she was going off, and I can't remember what it was. It was basically blaming the Jews for starting World War II or something like that. I can't remember. I just don't understand why it's necessary only with one group of people to lay the blame. Just, hey, that person was a Jew and they invented pornography. Well, pornography has been around. Like this is a specific example that I've seen. There's some guy, he ostensibly a Jew back in like the 60s or 70s, attributed to starting the modern wave of pornography in this country. And he's apparently a Jew or something. I don't know. I haven't looked into this. Well, number one, pornography did not start to exist 60 years ago or 50 years ago. It's been around for a long time. Lust didn't begin yesterday. It just didn't. I don't know why it's necessary, even if it's true, to point out that, hey, that person's a Jew and that person's a Jew and they did something really, really bad. Because we're not going around saying, hey, that person's a Hindu, that person's a Hindu, that person's a Buddhist, that person's a Buddhist. It always seems to be with just one group of people, the Jewish people. And it doesn't matter. Even if it's true that some dude, let's say the person I'm talking about, don't even know his name. He's known as the father of modern hardcore pornography. Okay? Let's just grant that. What does it matter? That doesn't mean you're a victim. That just means you're a sinner if you're addicted or you're caught in the trap of porn, whatever word you want to call that. So it just seems like there are some days when you turn on X, and you go on X, you would think that the Jewish people are more responsible for the ills of our culture and civilization than Lucifer is. That's what I'm talking about. It seems like it always just goes to one group of people. Anyway, going back to Ian Carroll. Didn't listen to his appearance on Rogan. I did read a very lengthy X post that he wrote in response to, I think it was Elon Musk a couple of months ago, when he just basically goes into his views of, I think, the Jewish people, and he never backed anything up. Ian seems to be a trust me bro type of guy. Okay, it seems to be a trust me bro. His only citation is, you can look all this up. You can look all this up. He is a walking, talking unfalsifiability fallacy. In fact, from most of the stuff that I've seen from him that's been like really edgy, like his commentary on Jews, it seems like he's engaging in the leftist tactic of signal jamming, whereas he just unloads fire hose style all of this information that is not really verifiable. He doesn't really back up. He just basically says, you got to trust me. You can go look it up yourself. The problem is, if you go look up any one of these points, well, my other 29 points, you didn't debunk. You only got me on 1 point, and the point that you just debunked me on, you're using a source that was paid for by the Jews. I think I saw one of the claims that he made on Rogan's show is that the Scofield Bible, which is largely attributed to be one of the most instrumental tools in the rise of premillennial dispensationalism in the United States, and therefore most Christians' kind of affection or affinity for the modern state of Israel. He said that was like paid for by Jews and the Rothschilds or something like that. And I even saw like a pretty hardcore Christian nationalist bro, hardcore reformed, not a dispy, on X come out yesterday. It was basically a subtweet but saying, and even he was like, I haven't seen any evidence, and I have looked for it, that there's any evidence that the Scofield Bible was basically underwritten in some plot of the Jews to turn Christians into sympathetic figures for a modern Zionist Jewish state. That's one probably inaccuracy from his interview. So to answer your question, finally, even though I didn't listen to his appearance on Joe Rogan's program, The Joe Rogan Experience, Ian Carroll, I have seen what he has posited before regarding the Epstein-Israel connection, if there is one. Basically, my understanding is it goes something like this. Jeffrey Epstein is a tool, or was a tool, of the Mossad, and his job was to go around and entrap various global leaders into basically pedophilia or grooming, underage prostitution, basically. That was basically his job. He was an agent of mass blackmail of powerful people at the behest of the Mossad. And so the contention is he was killed once he was finally locked up, maybe for good, back in, 2019? He was locked up, and the Mossad, fearing that he would actually spill the tea, spill the beans, whatever the phrase is, du jour, they were afraid that he would actually spill the beans on his connections to Israel. And that's why you're never, ever going to hear who was on his list. Because he was no longer a tool, he was no longer convenient towards Israel. To me, this doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So obviously, the contention here is that Israel is part of this globalist cabal pulling the strings behind the scenes. Okay? Who else is part of this globalist cabal? These same people would say the deep state. Which party in the United States is most aligned with this deep state? The contention is that would be the Democrat Party. Which party is more, up until apparently recently, more outspoken in their overt anti-Semitism, at least anti-Semitism coming from a pro-Islam perspective? That would be the Democrat Party. And which party was in charge? And some would say we're still in charge, even during the first Trump administration when Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. That would be the Democrat Party. And they never bothered to leak this supposed Israel Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy. I don't know. So let's just grant, though, I think it's an interesting thought experiment nonetheless. So let's just grant, though, that this is the reason why. What Ian Carroll said, we're never going to see the Epstein list because it would expose Jeffrey Epstein being a tool of the Israeli Mossad, an agent of blackmail against the most powerful people in this country. If that turned out to be true, obviously, that would damage the United States relationship with Israel. That would damage every country's relationship with Israel. If they were found to be the ones behind the strings, pulling the strings of Jeffrey Epstein, that would be incredibly damaging. So I still don't buy this theory, but if it were true, just for the thought experiment part of this, yeah, that would have devastating consequences. So I don't know about Ian Carroll. I would just be very leery about people who maybe you didn't hear about starting like 6 months ago or even a year ago, and all of a sudden they're everywhere and they're getting on every show. And I would also be very leery of people who just kind of do the signal jam leftist tactic of throwing like 50 really unfalsifiable factoids at you, daring you to debunk one of them, and then claiming victory because you debunked one of them because you didn't debunk the other 49. And that seems to be what Ian Carroll engages in. So I'm fine to sit back and kind of watch what happens with him. But I don't really understand this infatuation with this newfound infatuation with the Jewish people, seemingly on the right. Now, to the extent that I've said this before, to the extent that it's a problem, it's probably overstated and amplified on social media more than it is in real life. But, I think social media is closer to being real life than I thought it was, especially even 2 years ago. So I would tread lightly. When it comes to people like Candace Owens, I invoked her name a few minutes ago. The Jews made me illiterate. More at 11. Like, who listens to that? Who listens? She really made a good point. She really is illiterate. And the Jews made her that way. Who listens to that? I don't know. Let's move on. When we come back, got a question about starting a podcast from a faithful listener. Anxious to answer that question. And also, am I cheering for Lawfare against the Tate brothers, Tristan and Andrew? We'll talk about all that and more next. Jonathan Evans writes, Skype is going out of business and shutting down May 5th. In case you haven't heard, I did hear that. I posted on X a couple of weeks ago when that news broke. I'm not sure whether to hold a parade or break something, because for my day job, that has been the main video teleconference application that I have used my entire career in digital video, but it has been a bear to work with at times. Let's go to this. Jana Leslie says, in response to the Florida Attorney General going after the Tate brothers, you said the investigation should be welcomed as an opportunity to clear their names. Is this lawfare? I know they're slimy and immoral, but is this a good application of the law? I don't have enough information to know. Well, Jana, that's a very fair question, I think, to ask. And I would say, no, this is not lawfare. For one thing, we have used lawfare to describe what the federal government and various locales around the United States have engaged in to persecute Donald Trump. Think Letitia James, Alvin Bragg in New York City, Fani Willis in Fulton County, various sundry special counsels, Jack Smith, both in Florida. Was there another one? Yes, so there's the insurrection case in Washington, D.C. That's lawfare. That's specious application of What does specious mean? Suspect. Like, really, you're stretching it a little bit here. Specious application of existing laws. We're really stretching the Espionage Act just to get Trump here, okay? So that's specious application of existing law, coupled with the fact that the guy that they were targeting with was running for president against the incumbent in office who was in power. Okay? So that takes it to another level. So that's kind of lawfare. 2 points of lawfare. So what's going on with the Tates right now is not lawfare. They're not running for president, okay? You might think that they're being targeted unfairly. Going to my first point, are we seeing a specious application of existing law? No. James Uthmeier, the Attorney General, just said it the other day. They are on video at the very least intimating, bragging about crimes they may or may not have committed. Crimes are crimes in Florida. If those happened in Florida, we will investigate. And now, since they're international, they're Romanian citizens, I believe. But now that they're on our soil, and if they did any crimes on our soil, it would actually be unjust for us to not touch them because they're popular. That would be the unjust thing to do. But Jana, I think that was a fair question to ask after my comments yesterday. Jeff says, how do we get states like Idaho, Montana, Utah, and South Carolina to actually be red states like Iowa? Well, you really hope that your governor gets sent to be the ambassador to China, and that your current lieutenant governor has just a miraculous come to Jesus personal revival in her life. That's how you do it. Oh, and also, that happens to happen on the tail end of a multi-decade effort to actually turn Iowa red at the precinct level. And I know the people who are responsible for that. It was a perfect, good storm in Iowa. My boss at my current day job played a big role in that. The organization that my day job subleases from played a huge role in that. And it just so happened, after a decade and a half of work, that Donald Trump just so happened to appoint Terry Branstad, our governor at the time, as China ambassador, and our lieutenant governor at the time, Kim Reynolds, whom I did not like at the time. I really didn't. I thought she was going to be Nikki Haley, what Nikki Haley ended up being. She had some sort of spiritual conversion. She just decided at the end of her first re-election bid, I think it was, because she wasn't in office very long, filling in for Branstad. She just decided, you know what? I've identified that true believers, Christians in Iowa, are my ride or die base, and I'm going to service the heck out of them and court them to the nth degree. And I think she had I think that coincided with some sort of spiritual conversion. So that's all. Yep, that's all. Just a lot of work and some God things to happen. And in the case of Florida, turning it red like Florida, all you need is just, a margin of votes that wouldn't even fill Raymond James Stadium. Wouldn't even fill Raymond James Stadium. What was the margin in the 2018 Florida gubernatorial election between Andrew Gillum and Ron DeSantis? What was the margin there? That was 4,076,186 votes to 4,043,723 votes. So that's 34,000 vote difference. What is the capacity of Raymond James Stadium in Tampa? So we're at 34 or 33,000 votes separating them. 75,000. So it wouldn't even fill Raymond James Stadium. The margin wouldn't even fill Raymond James Stadium half full in Florida. And that's how you got Ron DeSantis. These are things that you can only attribute to Providence. That's what I'm trying to say. So there are things you can do, yes, but ultimately, we are citizen government. We're supposed to be led by citizens. But until we become those good citizens, until we become active one and all, it's just going to take acts of divine providence to have any shot for any red state actually going full bore red like Iowa and Florida. All right, let's go one more this week. This is from a faithful listener, Zach Stewart. And Zach has been very, very kind in how much he has promoted on his own channels, the AM Update, and I'm really appreciative of that. And he is asking this week, I've been meaning to ask this for a few weeks, but I was wondering what advice you would give for beginners producing a podcast. Obviously, I haven't done the broadcasting background or experience you do. In the past few weeks, I've rebranded my profile to look more professional and started using Canva and other apps to create thumbnails and graphics and even CapCut to edit the videos. While engineering is my day job, I have discovered I really like producing the producing side of having a podcast while my other co-hosts focus on the other stuff. Well, Zach, I think I started following you a couple of weeks ago from my main account and looking at your show that you produced, The Bearded Federalists. The branding looks great. The branding looks fantastic. Bearded Federalists. I haven't had time to listen or anything like that. So it really looks good. So thumbs up on that. And Zach, since you've been such a faithful listener and you've promoted my podcast almost as much as I have, I actually took the time to write down a few notes for beginners for podcasts. Because I've gotten this question before, and I get questions, specific questions, what microphone do I buy, this and that. But I have 3 kind of categories with 3 points in each category. So the categories are foundational tips, performance tips, and equipment tips. And it's in that order for a reason. And I think you'll find it's obvious when I start going through these. But number 1, foundational. Okay, these are the things that drive you. These are the things that you really need to concentrate on the most. Number 1, just do your show. Just do it. Commit to it. Do it over and over and over again. As much as you can. And again, I'm preaching to the choir here. I know you don't need to hear this. But for anybody who's maybe sitting in the background saying, is he telling this young man to go leave his family to start a podcast? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying as much as you can when you've gotten the other priorities in your life taken care of and taken care of in totality, taking care of your wife, your kids, your work, your day job. Try to make this as much of a priority as you can. I plan on telling my son Ben someday, try to make your hobbies creative. And creative doesn't mean artsy. What's the root word of creative? Create. You are making something. Try to make your hobbies creative. It doesn't have to be artsy. You're creating something of value. How much value? I don't know, but you are creating something. So make this as much, and I'm also going to tell him, with your hobbies, that has to be a lower priority than the other important things in your life. But when you pursue hobbies, do it to the best of your ability and do them excellently as you're creating things. So just do it and do it over and over again. Be organized to the point as much as you can. And I know it looks like there's 3 guys on this show, so getting schedules together can be kind of difficult, but commit. Commit as much as you possibly can. Because as much as content is king, even much or more so, consistency is king as you're trying to build an audience. So just doing it over and over again. Consistency and content are king. Number 2, foundational rules when you're starting a podcast or any media endeavor. Do not get imposter syndrome. Mel Johnson is the namesake of the Mel Johnson Media Center at the University of Northwestern St. Paul, where I went to college and started to learn about broadcasting. And there's a phrase, he's a great broadcaster, one of the best broadcasters or most beloved broadcasters in the history of Northwestern media. And Billy Graham was the first broadcaster in Northwestern media. So he actually, with the help of students, purchased KTIS AM back in the day. But Mel Johnson is the namesake of the Mel Johnson Media Center. And there's a quote that is on the wall for everybody to see as they walk through that building. I've seen it 1,000 times, and it goes something like this. Every time you open up the microphone, somebody needs to hear what you have to say. Somebody needs to hear what you have to say. Do not get imposter syndrome, okay? Don't think, oh boy, nobody's going to like this. Oh boy, does anybody really care? Nope. If it interests you, it interests somebody else. Somebody needs to hear your perspective on X, Y, Z, fill in the blank. You're an engineer, pretty smart dude probably. So somebody needs to hear what you have to say. So don't even let imposter syndrome start to creep into your consciousness. Don't be arrogant. Doesn't mean that you're a savant on everything. But don't let imposter syndrome sneak in. And then the third foundational tip, choose whether you're going to be a guest-driven or personality-driven or, for a talk format show, which it looks like you have, some sort of hybrid. But choose a structure and and stick to that. If it's going to be personality driven, you want to put your best stuff where you and your two co-hosts are talking about what interests you the most, what you think is going to drive the most listeners, or ears, or eyeballs. Put that first. Or if you're going to be a guest-driven show, put the awesome guest, tease the awesome guest, put that first, and then get to the other personality stuff second, if you see what I'm saying. So it looks like you're probably going to be more personality driven. With AM Update, I'm not guest driven at all. I don't have a problem with guests, don't really want them unless I botch a story like I did a couple of months ago with the Minnesota legislature, and then I had to have somebody come in and educate me on them, but I'm not really guest driven at all, which is hard to grow because guests, you have them on, they share them to their networks. That's the traditional model of growing a project like this. So, choose what you are primarily. Guest-driven, personality-driven, and then format and structure your content, each content, as such going forward. All right, second category here, performance. I'm not talking about the numbers that the podcast is doing. I'm just talking about the performance aspect of doing a venture like this. You got to try your best to hook people in the first 20 seconds, I would say. First 20 seconds, hook people into that show. Because you don't want to get a fish on the line and not hook them. That's what hook means. If you got a fish on the line, you got to reel them in. So that means you got to hook them. So make sure your hooks at the beginning of the of every single episode is something that, hey, if I heard that for the first time, I would definitely keep listening to this podcast. That's what I tried to do and probably could do even a better job at with AM Update. I preview kind of the top 3 items. I have the mini out of context montage. Hopefully that piques people's ears. I got to hear what that person was talking about, that sort of thing. So hook people, my first performance kind of tip. Second, air check regularly, but only listen once. So for you, it looks like maybe you're doing these once a month. So every month, just listen to one random episode, go through it. What was I thinking when I said this? We're doing a bit, or he said something like this. That sounded really good, or that was funny. That worked. Just your subconscious will kind of self-select and self-edit along the way as you do air checks. Number 3, this is really weird. One of the best pieces of advice I got for the performance side of this, as much as you can, and as long as you're not talking about something that's serious, even when you're talking about things and you think you need to have a neutral tone, smile as much as you can. It makes a difference. Even if you're forcing yourself to smile, it makes a difference in how people hear this. When you smile, it can take it from this person is checked out. You might be checked out when you're talking, but force yourself to smile. Dick Whitworth, one of my first bosses in radio, that was his words of advice for me. Force yourself to smile when you have the opportunity to go on the air. So that's my third performance tip. And then equipment is last for a reason. My overall piece of advice for equipment and the production side of things, and I know you came here wanting production advice, do your best to just not let the production side, the equipment side, cameras, microphones, just don't let it get in the way of the content. Don't let it get in the way of the content. Do your best. So if you got a crappy mic or it's overmodulated, that's really distracting. It's getting in the way of the content. You've got a camera that's smudged, that's really distracting. It's getting in the way of content. You've got a background that's disheveled, that's sloppy, getting in the way of content, distracting. Okay? So that's my overall piece of advice with equipment. So when it comes to specific equipment, I use specific programs. I use the Adobe suite. I actually have a personal copy of it now for AM Update, and use Premiere, use Audition for audio, Photoshop. I've gotten better at Photoshop as the years have gone by. So that's the primary software that I use. There are other web-based software that you can use. I know StreamYard is one of them, just complete and total tools for producing a podcast or video podcast. Riverside.fm, that's another one. In fact, I use that in a different way every day. There's a lot of different applications on Riverside.fm, but those are 2 that I have used before or currently use that are kind of one-stop shops for producing pretty good content, video podcasts. As far as equipment goes, I use, what is this microphone? I have the Shure MV7X microphone. This is XLR only because I prefer analog. I prefer everything to be analog. So I got this going into a little mixer. It's a Mackie 402 VLZ, just a little, technically 4-channel mixer. I have the main output going into a USB audio interface, and then from that into the computer that can interface with Audition and other programs as well. That's what I use. But I have recommended, and people have been really happy with the Shure MV7 Plus microphone. It's a very directional microphone, but it's really, really good. And people have liked it. And this one, unlike mine, it's more expensive, but it's a USB microphone. So it just plugs right into your computer. You don't have to go through a board. You don't have to go through a USB audio interface like I'm doing because I'm an old fogey. So those are two microphones that I actually really like. So I told you my microphone, told you my board, told you kind of my workflow. One other thing, if you can afford it or have space, if you've got a video webcast, try to do your best to set up some sort of backdrop decoration. Don't just rely on Zoom or Skype to blur out or do the weird green screen effect. It's almost always better to have some sort of backdrop. If you can, invest in some really cheap lighting just for key and fill. Those are two terms. If you're not familiar with lighting, you can look those up: key fill and backlight. If you can, if it's not something you want to invest that much in, most cameras' gains go up to the point where you don't really need lighting like that. So that's kind of my overall tips on the equipment side of things. I know maybe that's kind of what you wanted to come to here a little bit more. And if you have more specific follow-up questions, I'd be happy to field those next week, or if you want to shoot me a DM as well, you can do that. More specific questions when it comes to launching a podcast. Wow, I did not intend to go 40 minutes this morning, but here we are nonetheless. Appreciate each and every one of you. Unfortunately, my beautiful Bella is sick again, so no Suck Saturday tomorrow, but I will be back on Monday with another fresh edition of the AM Update. Have a wonderful weekend. Follow on X and Instagram @RealAMUpdate. See you again then.